Okay, welcome to part two of my response to Robert Boylan's How to Be an Effective Apologist. So in part one, I talked about the emphasis and the necessity for having a witness from the Spirit of the truthfulness of the Scriptures and the Gospel for yourself before you do this. And so part two, I want to go into parts 2 through 8, and they're all related. In fact, point 8 is read, 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 read. So the points 2 through 7 all have to do with reading, and point 2 is know the Scriptures. I mean, that's obvious. One of the things you're going to discuss as an apologist is the Scriptures, and that's all of them. Old Testament, New Testament, Book of Mormon, Doctrine and Covenants, Great Price. You need to know the Scriptures. And so I'm going to kind of continue off from the first story I told you about my experience in the MTC and receiving the anti. And so obviously I stayed on my mission. But after reading the anti, I wasn't concerned that I didn't know history and stuff, like Joseph Smith, but I realized I did not know the Scriptures well enough to talk about some of the doctrinal stuff. I knew I didn't know enough history too, but it was the doctrinal stuff I knew I could handle right then and there by getting to know the Scriptures. So I'm like, I'm going to read the Scriptures, standard works, before I leave the MTC. Now, I was there to learn French, a foreign language. I was going to be in the Provo MTC for a little over 2 months. Not even a full week after that or something like that. And I read the entire standard works in that 2 months. And when I came up for air, I realized that was too much, too fast. I really just... It was a blur. It was all a blur. I had no clue what I read, no clue what I'd really seen or read. I mean, I remembered bits and pieces, but nothing was coherent, and nothing made a lot of sense. And that was because it was too much, too fast. And so I decided, okay, I'll try this again, but I'll do it by the end of the year. And that was going to be about 4.5, 5 months. And I did it again. That time was a little bit better. I had to do a lot less reading a day, which is good because by then I'm also doing my missionary work, knocking doors, talking to people, so on and so forth. You get the idea. And so I read the Scriptures, and I remembered more. Things made sense. I was able to recall more. And so then I thought, what if I do this every year? So I set the goal to read the Scriptures every year. Now, I have not read the Scriptures every year. In fact, I've read the entire standard works once. Now, I say that because I've never read the Song of Solomon again. Oh my crap, what a waste of time. Who knew there was so much useless stuff? So I skip the Song of Solomon when I read the Scriptures. I do not read the Song of Solomon. So please, no. So I almost read the entire standard works. Now, there are years I do not read the entire standard works. Family, work, different things take up space and time. And so I don't necessarily worry too much about reading the entire standard works, but I do read my Scriptures every year. And I keep my nose into reading other things as well. But it was important to know the Scriptures, because when you do go out and you're proselytizing, you find out some people know nothing. Some people really know their Bible. Some people think they know their Bible. Maybe they don't necessarily know it that well. But so you have to know your Scriptures, because the Scriptures are the introduction to the doctrine. The Scriptures tell you what God has said to man and what man has had to deal with through life. And I am thankful for the fact that it occurred to me to read the scriptures after I learned I knew nothing. Because that came in very helpful to read the scriptures on a regular basis. Point 3 on his list, and I'm going to read this off. Read LDS scholarship and apologetics. The anti-Mormon that's out there has been around since the beginning of the church with Joseph Smith. Certain things are new. We'll talk about some of those things later on, but the polygamy, the plurality of gods, the mistranslation of Abraham, that you just, there's, it's like throwing spaghetti against the wall. You pick up a handful and you see what sticks, and that's all they do. They throw everything at you, and they hope that one or two things stick that bother you enough that you'll lose your faith. That's what anti is to me. It's just a frag bomb going off, taking out whoever with whatever. And it's trash. And these arguments are old. And a lot of the LDS apologetics answer a lot of the questions that are out there. Now, I will say this. Are there definitive answers to every issue? No. Not at all. I don't believe in such a thing. I don't believe absolute knowledge in anything is possible. As far as just learning and logic go, I do believe the ultimate answer and authority is revelation, and that comes from God, which is where sola scriptura goes wrong. You need that revelation, and I do believe revelation supersedes a lot of what we think we know. Now, not that means science is dumb. No. But when we get to apologetics, rely on revelation. And a lot of what the scholars are writing, they're writing in response to anti-Mormons, or just perhaps statements of faith concerning greater points on doctrine, like more light on the priesthood, more light on what the early church fathers taught, translations from Dead Sea Scrolls, Nag Hammadi. You get the idea. And sometimes there are answers in the apologetics that are final. You're not going to come up with a better answer. Whether somebody wants to accept that or not is one thing. But the fact that the answers are there. Now, apologetics do not answer everything, because you do have to believe enough to accept what they're telling you. And some people just look at it and go, that's not enough evidence. And that's, if the evidence is not enough, how much do they require? What do they require? I do know some people of the church, and they're like, well, if, and the if is so freaking overwhelming and unrealistic. There's no way they're going to accept anything that would change their minds. And that's sad. And you have to just kind of accept it. The fourth point on his list was read non-LDS scholarship. Now, we're not talking arguments against the church here. We're talking non-LDS scholarship. And this is points of what other people believe. What do the Calvinists believe? What do the Catholics believe? What do the Methodists, Presbyterians? You get the drift. And I think that's because you'll understand where they're coming from with their perspective on faith. And that's absolutely just undeniable. You have to know where other people are at with what they're thinking you're doing. I mean, think about it. What if I showed up at your door and I'm like, this is why the Colorado Avalanche are the greatest hockey team in history. And you're like, I don't like hockey. I'm like, I don't care. Accept what I have to say. Because they're football fans. I got to win them over. I got to show them why hockey makes. So, and I want to use this as an example. I think in the church we would agree that Jesus the Christ is one of the greatest books written about Christ. I love that book. It's one of my favorite non-scriptural books to read. I read it maybe every other year, every third year. But we tend to think, oh, Elder Talmage had a room in a temple. He must have had revelation in the Spirit when he wrote it. And he did. I do believe he did, because there is a spirit in that book that is amazing. But when you look at it, two of the main books, not the only books, but two of the main books he relied on were these: Jesus the Messiah and Life of Christ. I happen to have both of these copies, because when I saw that Elder Talmage had mentioned these, I thought, I want those books too. I want to know what inspired. And there's so much information there. There's so much good information. And it doesn't, these books are not built to dissuade me from being Mormon. They're built to persuade me to believe more in Christ. And Jesus the Messiah, written by a Jewish man who converted to Christianity, Edersheim, and Farrar, well-known Christian apologist. Both of these guys wrote in the 1800s, predating Elder Talmage. And their books are wonderful. I don't find the same spirit in them, but I do find a lot of information that is fantastic. So read other books. Matter of fact, Robert Boylan talked about reading a book on Catholic priesthood that got him to ask a few questions about our version of the priesthood, that inspired him to write a book on the priesthood. So that's fantastic. These things, other faith perspectives, can be faith promoting and can lead us just to go, hey, wait a minute, I wonder. Because let's remember, when the church was being formed with Joseph Smith had leanings as a teenager, but he followed the Spirit, followed the angel, and so be it. But other people came in and contributed. Pratts and Rigdon, and sometimes they brought their old faith with them, but sometimes that faith was sustaining. Sometimes things had to change. But there's nothing wrong with positive influences. So going on from that, read the best of the other side. If you're going to read anti, and I don't recommend it, but if you're going to get into this, you need to know what their arguments are, and you need to know what the best arguments are. There is something called a straw man. And that is, here's the weakest version of the other point of view, and I can prove this wrong. And that's great. You can knock down a straw man. You can light that on fire and make it turn it into smoke real easy. But when you can take on the steel man, the strongest version of argument, and you can handle it capably, and you can talk about it knowingly, then you're a force and a person to be reckoned with. You are someone who is actually of help and not a hindrance. Because when people find out you don't really know what you're talking about, and that's why you're dealing with weak arguments, you become a joke, and then they base your religion and your beliefs off of you. And you make the church look bad if you come with weak arguments. From that point, the next point was understand historical and logical context. Okay. When we're talking about polygamy and Joseph Smith, you cannot view history through the lens of 2022. It's not the same. And I would not compare the 1800s to the 1000s or to the year zero or 500 BC. You can't compare eras like that. Traditions, cultures, customs have changed. And people have grown and adapted and tried to work within all of these frameworks. But to condemn somebody for what they did in the 1800s by the standards of the 2000s is ridiculous and dangerous, and it's a form of moralization that is disgusting and not fair. And as far as good logic, does A and B make C? Will C then lead to D, E, F, and all the way to Z? Are you taking shortcuts that would undermine your arguments? Are you ignoring bad arguments on the other side? And this is where Errol, in the video that Robert had, Errol had these giant posters of these logical fallacies. And I studied philosophy in college for a bit. I know what fallacies are. I can spot a lot, but you can't ask me to name them. I'm like, that's one where you're saying it's because somebody else is powerful. That's, yeah, no, there's names for, like, the fallacy of authority, the fallacy of the red herring, you get all these. I couldn't define them, but most of the time I tend to be able to see them. But he had these definitions, and it was amazing to see him up there, and how hard these guys work on logical consistency and spotting the inconsistencies in others. You want to take on the arguments that are the strongest. Now, I'll probably start with weak stuff so that you guys learn to trust me, but you want to start with, you want to be able to handle the strongest stuff. And his last point, well, second to last point. His last point was read. But I mentioned that earlier. But the second to last point, I think, goes back to the first point. If you're going to do this for the right reasons. This channel is not to make me famous. This channel is not to make me rich. It's a Mormon channel. Not much riches coming my way on YouTube or Rumble, I don't think. But there are people out there that are looking for reasons to believe. There are people out there looking for something to believe in. And if something I say helps somebody with that, I am blessed. Because that's what God would have. God would have us blessing the lives of others in whatever way we can. So you gotta read. And then read some more, and then read some more. And I think you have to write. Jordan Peterson talks about writing to give you a sense of clarity and organizing your thoughts. And I do a lot of writing, and then I throw it away. Because I'm better at speaking than I am at writing, although you wouldn't know it from this video. But I have a talk to give at church on Sunday, and I'm ready. And my talks are very good. And I'm a good teacher. A great teacher. Who am I kidding? At the best. Pasta. Anyway, read. Have the Spirit. And do this for the right reasons. You're not doing this for you or for your ego. You're doing this for other people. Anyway, that's all. Enough for this. This will be the end of the Robert Boylan talk. Talk to you guys later. Have a good night. Like, subscribe, share, and thank you.